Sweet. Well, love it having all of you here. Great to see you all. Thanks for engaging in the chat. If you haven't had a chance yet, absolutely drop where you're joining us, what's your role, and your check-in number based off of that candy. Uh, so as we get started, we're here, less fires, more impact. If you thought you were going to a different webinar, sorry, this is what you're getting today. So we're going to do kind of a rapid fire of 6 tools that will help you reduce reactivity. We know we live in that state a lot in schools, and so we're excited to just talk with you about some tools and give you some resources and hopefully a little community here to share. I'm Megan Cruz, founder and executive director of Ignited Consulting. I'm based in Minnesota. I've been in education for over 20 years, been consulting with schools for over a decade. And a lot of you from Minnesota probably know you from some PBIS and MTSS work, and super excited to be joined with Terry.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Terry Torzinski. I serve as the co-founder and managing director of Ignited Consulting. So excited to be with you all today. Similar to Megan, I have spent over 20 years in education as a high school teacher, a high school counselor, a national consultant. So excited to share some good experiences with you all today. I've had opportunities to work with school districts and county offices and state departments across the country around building more proactive systems. So just excited to share some experiences with you all. So just a little bit about our company, if you're unfamiliar with what it is that Ignite Ed is, just to kind of give some background context of where we're coming from. So our mission is really around building multi-tiered systems of support framework. So as I had mentioned, working with school districts, county offices, regional offices, the idea is exploring our frameworks to figure out how can we be more systematic, how can we create processes that are more proactive, and that is our bread and butter. So thinking about whole child supports and how we can be more intentional in those spaces. We do that through implementation science. So really thinking through the world of a practitioner and how can we take frameworks and theories and actually bring it into implementation practices. So we all know we've been in spaces before where we learn frameworks and theories and that sounds great on paper, but what's it actually look like every day in our buildings is the golden question. So that's what we like to answer. And we do that in several ways, but one way with our core values I want to elevate is that we serve educators. Educators are the core of what we want to focus on. Of course, we want to talk about students, but if we are not serving our educators and making sure that they're well prepared and equipped, then they're not going to be able to serve the students as much as they can, as well as they can. So that's where we believe in with Ignited Consulting. That's kind of where our background stems from, just to kind of give you an idea of who we are. And just acknowledge who's in the room with us today. So it is National School Counseling Week. So we have several school counselors and other student support specialists that are on this call today. So thank you for everything that you do for the profession in school counseling as well as your students. So it's, in my opinion, one of the best professions in the world. So National School Counseling Week, congratulations. And I hope you're enjoying your time and getting spoiled this week.
And as a former school counselor, like I'm not sure we get spoiled, but now's the week to do it. And just a moment of acknowledgement. Many of the folks that registered for the webinar are also from Minnesota. And just a moment of, we know, like life in Minnesota schools is tough right now. A lot of you checked in as Sour Patch Kids, but we just know that the work that you are doing to keep kids safe, even to keep them educated right now, whether you're doing that remotely, to keeping your staff safe, just our hearts go out to you. And we are with you both in Minnesota, and I think I could probably speak for those that are out state as well. So oftentimes we do a land acknowledgement, but this is our acknowledgement to you in this virtual space.
So in this virtual space, let's just talk about some nuts and bolts, some of the logistics that we know questions will come around. So this webinar is being recorded, and we know that you have a lot of things going on. So if you're not able to attend the whole time, you will get a recording afterwards. So that will be coming to your email shortly after this webinar. We will be dropping resources in the chat as we talk through the slides. So our goal is to, again, give you resources that you can employ immediately. So we will be dropping those in the chat as we talk through them. And then that will also be up as part of the follow-up email as well, the resources in the slide deck. Within 24 hours, you should be receiving those. And then last but not least, we want you to utilize the chat. Let's just maximize our brilliance together. I always say just because I'm the one and Megan's the one leading the learning today doesn't mean we're the only one with knowledge in the room. So we would love for you just to utilize that chat to share your experiences, your learnings, your takeaways, because if we're a learning community, we really will move forward together in terms of some good ideas and learning. So enough about us. Let's hear from you. So we want this to be interactive, but we need to kind of know what your current reality is. So if you're thinking about your current reality in your school, at your site, in your position, would you say that you are living in a cycle of reactivity? Or are you pretty kind of proactive, kind of reactive, a little bit of both? Or as the kids might say, 6, 7. I'm a little bit on both sides of the continuum. Or you are really, really proactive, but you're just here to learn some new techniques. Like you feel good about your systems, you just need a little bit more nuggets just to kind of really bring you to the finish line. So 1, 2, or 3, if you could just drop it in the chat, which one are you?
I love making it up. But Patricia's like, I'm a 1.5.
You
Can you
usually were.
describe that for us? Lots of
You don't want to
twos
fully
in the
commit,
chat.
not fully committing to one or the other.
Oh, that was awesome. Lots of twos. It looks like we're going to call on James because he's like a 2 to a 3. So he's going to join us as a facilitator.
All right.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing. And
I don't know
honestly,
about
it's just reflection, right? It's reflection on where we are, why we're coming into this space together, and knowing that we can all take away something. Like, yes, we all have different programs right now in different levels, but we will gain something from this learning space. So I always say, we're all beginning learners here. We're all going to take something away from our experience together.
Awesome. So we want to think about reactivity. Let's define that. Right? Defining reactivity means we're responding to problems all the time, right? And then we need to think about, well, if we're responding to problems, what makes something a problem? So I want you to think on 2 little levels here. One, what is an individual currently doing? What's the behavior or the action of a person? And we think about that. And typically, if there's a discrepancy there, that's what becomes the problem because they're expected to do something else, right? So if an individual is expected to do something which is here and the individual is actually performing right here, we get into like this little uh-oh stage. Like that's where the problem happens. We're asking a student, typically, could be an adult, or some sort of a person in our school building to do something, but they actually aren't doing it to the level that we have expected them. So that creates the problem in the context. And then we tend to get into this cycle of reactivity. There's a lot of current realities that are out there right now.
Yeah, so one of the current realities, as you can depend if you're a teacher, an administrator, school counselor, student support specialist, I'm sure you're seeing it. That student behavior is one of the top barriers to learning right now, right? So and there's actually statistics out there that talk about how 87% of public schools report that student behavior has negatively impacted teaching and learning since the pandemic. So even more so now since the pandemic, and students are losing instructional time as a result of it. So we have to figure out a better way because schools are spending instructional time putting out fires instead of doing the teaching that they know we want to do.
Another reality is that teachers are reporting behavior challenges that drive burnout. Okay, so we know that. And 74% of educators are saying misbehavior has increased. Interesting. And 40% report increased physical or verbal aggression towards staff or peers. Love for you to like think in the chat. Is that higher than you thought or lower than the thought? Maybe just a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Are those statistics higher than what you would think? That we know that that's what's leading to burnout, right? 3/4 of educators are saying misbehavior has increased, and nearly half of them is saying that physical and verbal aggression towards them or their peers has increased. So what that's telling us is we got to look at tier 1 systems because when they are weak, adult capacity completely erodes.
One more thing that will elevate before we get into our content is that many schools are operating in a referral-driven tier 2, which means, and this may be your part of your reality, is you were just responding to whatever referrals come to us, whether it be self-referral from student, teacher referral, community referral, family referral, wherever that's coming from, that is what's driving and operating our schools. Well, the research says that 10 to 15% of students need targeted tier 2 behavior or SEL supports. And in many schools, those tier 2 begins only after repeated office referrals or crises. which means that there's no proactive early skill building happening. So we're responding after the fact, after they've already have several misbehavior or behavior referrals in the classroom, after they're not attending, after they're not being academically successful. That's when tier two begins, which oftentimes it might be too late. So how can we be more proactive and think about early intervention in regards to skill building? So without intentional tier two systems, students escalate instead of stabilize, which is why this work is so important.
All right, so we are going to dive right in. Knowing those statistics, that's kind of like a both and. We have to work on tier one foundational practices while still setting up our tier two and tier three response systems. So we're going to dive into those top six practical tools. We're going to lean into that webinar theme of less fires. So we're going to start with proactive tool number one. If we think about it, if there's a hot ground below us, we have to have some boots that are going to protect our feet. And what is that foundation that we need in schools? It's the proactive behavior strategies and very strategic responses. We need systems of strategies and systems of responses to actually create that predictability and that consistency with students. So I am kind of a book nerd, a research nerd. There's going to be a lot of text on the screen right now, just letting you know. But this is research that is really important, which is why it's going to be on the screen. PBIS, so positive behavior supports, whether you love or hate those four letters put together, that's up to you. It's probably whether or not it was delivered with implementation fidelity or not, right? But tier one positive behavior supports has such a strong evidence base that it demonstrates that universal behavior supports improves behavior, it improves academics, it increases school climate, especially when we have a team of people that are dedicated to creating what's that core foundational practice that we need to put into place. So we've got references there from Sugai and Horner, kind of like the big wigs, right, in PBIS research. But we know that if we spend time, energy, and effort and have a team dedicated to creating behavioral practices and responses, that's automatically going to help us become more proactive. It's not about giving out a bunch of tickets. It's about these four things. Tier one positive behavior is teaching behavior expectations explicitly. Explicitly teaching, right? How many of you have needed to be explicitly taught something over and over and over again, right? We need to be reminded, we need to be taught, then we need to be reminded. So we're teaching whatever the school-wide expectations are and or our classroom expectations. Every single human being in the building should know what these are and should know how to teach them and it should be part of their actual, language on the day to day. We also want to reinforce, right? That's where that acknowledgement comes into play. We have to, though, reinforce something that's already been taught. It's hard to say to a student, good job, because their response should be, good job for what? If Terry says to me today, Megan, good job, my reaction should be, well, Terry, good job for what? Like it has to be specifically tied back to whatever behavior expectation was taught. And then we need to consistently respond. So where's our team of people coming together to create a response system so that's predictable and consistent and providing that safety for children? Because if we're all over the place with our responses, kids are automatically going to be heightened, which then, of course, leads to the more fires. And we need to use data then to change our systems and our practices. So where are we collecting any type of behavioral data? Are we collecting only response data? Are we collecting implementation data? Are the adults doing what we've set out to do? So you have to think about where are we looking at data to then continuously improve those systems. So we need strategies often to be able to make this happen. So we want to think about a continuum of response. So this has been out in the world of PBIS for decades. This comes straight from the Midwest PBIS network. I'm going to show you 12 strategies. We're going to chunk them 6 and 6. But what's our continuum of response, like proactive responses to behavior? And sometimes we just need to remind ourselves when we're in a classroom, when we're walking in the hallway, when we're supervising in the lunchroom, maybe when we're coaching a teacher, maybe we are the teacher, whatever that looks like, we have to have a continuum of response that kind of goes from low to high levels of response. So here's those first 6. We can plan ignore. That's easier said than done, right? We can use proximity, eye contact, nonverbal cues or signals. We can praise others. We can redirect. Okay, those are all kind of our teacher toolbox that sometimes we just forget about, but they're free, easy, based in evidence that we can deliver instantly. We need nothing to do it. The other six are reteaching, right? Those expectations goes back to the slide before. We can praise, approximate. So this means that we are praising what the child is doing right versus pointing out what they're doing wrong. We can specifically correct errors. We can work on regulate, relating, and reasoning. We can provide choice and we can conference with students. So as you can see, it goes from low to high. So what number, is there any number in there that you would like to learn more about? We're not going to talk about all of them, but Terry dropped the resource for you. So you can pull that, but drop a number 1 through 12 in the chat of something that you would like to learn more about, or maybe you're an expert in all of them, and then we'll just move on. 10. All right, 10. We'll do 10 first since we're seeing a few of those. Okay, regulate, relate, and reason, right? It means first, before we engage in the student when they're of a heightened behavior, we need to give them time to regulate. So when we think about regulate, like how do we quiet down their stress? How do we help them just get into a point where they can actually access their like reasoning brain? Then we want to relate to them. So how do we relate one to one? We respond to them with empathy. So we might sit down and let's say Terry is behaving in a way that is incongruent with the expectations. And I'd sit down and I would just relate to her. Terry, it looks like you've been having a tough time this morning. Okay, so then we just relate. How do we show empathy? Like engage in that response with empathy. Engage with them, saying, I know where you're coming from. And then you can reason with them. Then you can actually talk through the behavioral error in a spot where they can access the brain, that they can work through it, right? They can access their frontal lobe at that time and they can talk through and have a conversation. But that takes time. The child has to process. We need to probably know the student a little bit to help them regulate and figure out how much time they need. Then we relate and reason with them. Is there another one, Terry, that came out? 10 was the
So
highest.
8 and 9 are
Maybe eight.
showing some.
Okay. So 8 is kind of what I mentioned before. So it's differential reinforcement. So if I'm doing something that is not expected in a space, but there's maybe something that I am doing that's expected, I as the adult have to pause because typically the negative noise is louder. So I need to look at that child and say, what are they doing right? So instead of pointing it out that I don't know, I'm going to use something simple. They're tapping their pencil and saying, hey Darnell, please stop tapping your pencil. I'm going to say, Darnell, thank you so much for like having your eye contact on me. Let's keep that up during this lesson, right? So I'm like avoiding what's actually annoying and I'm praising what they're doing well. And if I keep doing that, likely that negative behavior or the unwanted behavior is going to stop. All right.
All right. Well, let's go on to practical tool number two. Tool number two. Thank you, Megan, for sharing.
That's a
Hopefully,
mouthful. Practical
yeah, I
tool
know,
number
right?
two.
It's like so practical tool number two. We're gonna stick with the realm of tier one, but now we're gonna talk about what does that tier one skill building for social and life skills look like? What does that look like in our buildings? And as we think about that, I'm gonna ask you a guiding question, and you don't need to put in the chat, just a little bit of reflection. What does every single student need and deserve around social and life skill development? And again, we support different grade levels that might look different from elementary to middle school to high school. But just think about that question. What does every student need and deserve around social and life skill development? And how are they getting it? That's the other piece of it. How are they receiving those particular social and life skill development learnings, right? So what does that look like and what is our responsibility in that? So when you think about this and the intentionality that it takes to do it well, we first have to think about our lived reality. So our lived reality is that we have a lot of fires that are happening in our building. A lot of times we're in reactive mode, as you had indicated earlier. And so when do I have time, Terry, to teach social and life skill development, right? Like I'm just trying to put out fires. So I would ask you, what are those common fires that you're consistently seeing? Maybe they're coming through your office through behavior referrals. Maybe they're going through your school counselors, your other student support specialists around needs that students need to talk through. But what are those common fires that your students are coming to on a daily basis that are really consuming the majority of your time? So let's sit on that for a minute. Yes, Patricia, thank you for adding. Let's add to the chat. If I were to ask you, what are your common needs and fires that consistently consume the majority of your time? Go ahead and drop in the chat. What would those be? So Patricia said they need to feel their voices matter, feel respected by adults and other students. So they want to have some empowerment, elevate their voice. What other needs do you see coming through? What are the fires? What are the fires that are monopolizing your time?
Or it could be your friend's time too, doesn't have to be your time.
Your time. It could be in classrooms, it could be in office settings, it could be in hallways. What are the fires?
That chat is like blowing up, so it means that they just have so many they can't even think of one. They can't communicate, yeah.
Yep, can't communicate, social issues with friends. Yep. So when you think about these things, and a lot of times if I ask this question, this will come up like conflict resolution, self-management, managing emotions, regulation, emotional regulation, like a lot of things will come up that way, right? So we would ask you to think about like if these are the fires that you consistently talk about that are interfering our classroom settings, our hallways, our office settings, consider how those needs might be met on a larger scale. And can we be more efficient in a tier one setting with teaching that in a more proactive way, as well as what we mentioned earlier, coming at us in reactivity, right? So I see coping skills are coming up and how we respond. So typically when these emotions escalate, right, they'll be sent out of a classroom or they'll have to meet with a teacher, they meet with a school counselor. And what happens is that we're trying to regulate emotions so that we can be back in learning spaces. Well, the problem with that, the challenge with that, is that we haven't really taught them how to proactively address those emotions before it gets to the point where they are right now. So they don't have a learning brain. So if I come to you dysregulated because of a need that I have, right, I can't learn at that moment. The best thing I can do is try to manage myself in a better way and then get back to class and try to learn. But there's been no learning around how I identified that early. So activate the learning brain of your students by going into a tier one setting and say, okay, look, this is what a trigger is. When you start to identify triggers in your body, here's the things you'll start to notice, and here's how you'll start reacting. Identifying those early, naming it, giving students strategies when they have a learning brain prepares them to handle those situations when they come, right? And they're going to come. It's still going to happen. But when it does happen the next time, and I've already taught them in a very proactive manner, I can say, hey, do you remember when we talked about triggers and how we manage those last time I was in your classroom? Did you identify any of those? And that conversation sounds different, right? Now we can move forward with how I can build that skill development without just reacting to my current reality. So that does take time. That takes a little bit more advanced notice around how I proactively address these concerns. But if you're having the same conversation with the same students over and over and over again, I would ask, is there a better way to do that? Can we do that in a tier one setting? What can be provided in a tier one setting that's more scalable, that's going to meet the needs of more students and help save some of that time in the long run?
Exactly, regulate, relate, and reason, right?
There
Right
you
there.
go. There you go.
So let's teach all of our classroom teachers how to do that consistently. Yeah.
And of course, with that, how do we do this, right? There are formal ways. So classroom lessons, that whether that be delivered by teachers or school counselors or collaboratively, there can be lessons around that. School-wide assemblies could be another way, or it doesn't always have to happen in a classroom setting, but develop some common language and messaging for students so they can kind of get those skills early and awareness early. Small groups, maybe you do have a more specific group that needs to hear this and be more proactive in that area. Or to be honest, it can be embedded naturally into your core curriculum. It doesn't have to be a separate lesson itself. Like, where are there avenues and opportunities to start infusing some of these challenges that you're facing, whether it be around self-management, time management, emotions, like how can we start embedding these naturally into our curriculum so it's just part of our everyday language, right? So just being intentional about what that looks like and thoughtful and creative about infusing some of those things. From an informal standpoint, there's definitely opportunity there. It doesn't have to be something that's formalized. It can be something that's just as easy as modeling. As adults in the building, how are we modeling some of these things when we start to feel triggered, right? When I'm starting to feel stressed or I'm starting to feel anxious, how do I manage myself as adults, as an adult in the building, right? And then how can I then teach that for my students? Practicing. It doesn't have to be again another lesson. Just what if before I give a lesson, maybe there's a little bit of practice beforehand, a little bit of practice afterwards. Maybe there's a chunk in there within my lesson that I'm embedding some of these strategies. Again, depending on the topic that you're teaching and what's happening during the time. But again, it's just these small little nuances of intentionality where we can enhance not only the learning of the content that we're delivering, but also the learning of these social skills. Cues, prompts, reminders, these are all another part of it, right? Just thinking through naming it. Like, oh, I saw that you actually managed when you started to feel stressed, you actually manage your emotions in a positive way, right? Prompting students to recognize that this is what we're doing here. So just thinking through how that could look in regards to a classroom setting, hallway setting, office setting, and more intentionality with this skill building. Because the research says we can have elements of these supports in our building like an SEL, like a PBIS, but when they're done in silos and they're not done in an integrated fashion, in an intentional fashion, we just don't get the results that we want, right? So when we think about universal efforts, it has to have an integrated approach. It has to be part of our curriculum, part of our everyday language, part of everything that we do at culture and climate within our building. That's when you're going to see the most amount of impact when it comes to making these supports for students most valuable.
Awesome. So moving on to practical tool number 3. Let's just imagine in a super proactive school environment. We've got high quality positive behavior supports that are happening daily and consistently. We have high quality social life and learning skills that are happening. We've got absolutely top-notch instructional practices when we're delivering curriculum. So kids are engaged, okay? This is all happening. So we've determined tier 1 is super, super solid. Now, what we need to do before kind of referring to tier 2 is we need to think about our capacity and create some rules around when is it an appropriate time to refer a student for additional support. So when we think about this, this is kind of like tier 1.5-ish, not really. It's like, where's our tier 1 team that's really responsible for climate and culture, kind of behavior, attendance, SEL, all the things. And how does that team know when we've got an influx of data to actually move a student along to needing some more support, whether that's like a group or maybe it's some performance interventions. We'll talk about that later. Whatever that looks like, how do we know? So the first thing is we need to assess capacity. And this word is thrown around there like, I don't know, it's thrown around like spaghetti. I just don't have the capacity. My plate's too full. All the things that people say. I love this definition and hopefully it makes you laugh. The sheer breathtaking amount of stuff you can cram into something before it explodes, metaphorically or maybe literally, depending upon the context, right? That's what we think about with capacity. So if I were to ask you this question, I want you to go to your little Zoom bar and you can see the reaction buttons on the bottom. It's a little like kind of sideways heart is what I look at that as. It looks like this right here. I want you to open that up and click green if you're like, yes, I have way more capacity. And I want you to click the red X if you're like, no, I cannot have one more thing added to my plate. So which one are you? Like in the reaction, if you can find it, or drop it in the chat if you can't find your reaction. But oh no, how many of you are like, yes, give me more to do? Right? Oh, Jason's like, yeah, give me more to do. Oh, that's awesome, Jason. We got to talk to him, everyone. But likely we don't have any more capacity. We're not able to hire more people. Can't create more time in our day. So we want you to think about capacity like this in simple terms, not what's on the screen. This is not rocket science. It's not a bunch of formulas and whatnot. But here's how we want you to think about it. We want you to think about where's your early intervention data. Maybe you call it your early warning indicators. Maybe it's whatever, your proactive detection data. However you call it, it's literally looking at universal screening, probably for academics, hopefully for social emotional behavioral. You might start to think about what is some student response data. You might think about grades, not end of term grades, but maybe some progress monitoring around grades. You're going to look at attendance, are kids showing up? You're going to look at behavior referrals. Drop in the chat what early intervention data do you collect? Because that is showing us that we have a need, right? So we look at need And then we look at our capacity. We've got to like subtract the capacity, right? So let's just say we have five student support personnel in our building that can do more at like tier two and tier three. So we say we have five, and maybe those five individuals can support whatever, 10 students for easy math. So then we have 50, right? So that's the number of students they can serve. Well, if our need is higher than 50, what does that create? That creates a gap, which means there's all these students that can't be served by more intense support. But we're often stuck in this cycle of these one-on-one, we got to support them with more, with more, with more. And we actually don't have more because there's no additional capacity. Another way to look at this, our need, our early intervention data, drop that stuff in the chat. What are you collecting? Universal screening, could be looking at the ABCs, attendance, behavior, and whether or not they're performing in class. 200 students. Okay, let's look. Like we have 200 students that have a need, but we can only support 100 students. That means we have 100 students that there's a gap that we're still going to look like a lot of things are on fire or there's an additional need. So we want you to think in terms of how are you creating these decision rules to actually say, this is the number of students we can support with higher levels of support, like tier two or tier three. And these are the ones that we actually just need to do better at tier one. And we have to think through that in a process, and we got to put numbers to the process because then it becomes less personal. It's not you're saying, oh, I can't meet the needs of the, whatever, the science teacher who keeps coming to me with all these referrals. No, like let's take the personalization out of it. Let's look at data and let's look at what the decision rules were that we created. So I want you to think through this. Think about your student body. If you have a pen and paper next to you, think about how many students are at your site. Okay. So for ease of math here, we took that 200 from the slide before. 200 students look like they could benefit from something more than tier one. And say we have a system of 500. So that's 40% of our students, which isn't unrealistic, look like they could benefit for something more than just high quality tier one. That's a lot of kids, right? So I want you to go back to think, what did we determine as our capacity? Well, we determined that we could meet the needs of 100 students. So that's 20%. So that means we actually have the staffing to support intervention or higher level of skill building for 100 students. Okay, so that's only 20. So we have a gap of 20% of students. So this is how we should be thinking about this. Since 20% is our number, look at 20% or more of that proactive detection data. So if your screening data is saying all this and you have more, which in this situation we do, we have 40%. If we have 40%, that means we need to look at tier one. It's a school-wide issue. Maybe it's a grade level issue. Maybe we just need to work with the 10th graders or just the fourth graders, whatever that looks like. And then we focus on tier one. How do we get better at delivering tier one more consistently? Okay. Another way to look at that is if we have, in this situation, we have 40%. So we can't meet that need. We need to look at certain classrooms. So if there's more than 20% of our referrals or kind of our early warning indicators are coming from certain classrooms, then we need to probably provide some teacher coaching and support. That's more of a, or maybe it's even a grade level of teacher support. So you need to look at that avenue too, how to provide direct coaching, teaching, prompting, cueing, and reminding of teachers to do high quality tier one social, emotional, behavioral, and academic support. Then on the far side, if it's 20% or less, then that's kind of our magic number. Then we can say, yes, let's refer them for additional skill building or, reminders for behaviors that they already know or skills that they already have. So we want to dig in more around tier two. That doesn't mean, oh, all 20% of those students are going to have an intervention. No, it just means we're going to talk more about those students and we're going to dig in a little bit more because those are the number of students we can actually meet. So here you can see two of the solutions are digging back more into tier one and providing high quality coaching where the need is at. The third piece is let's look at our tier two, tier three system and interventionists and see what we can dig into to be able to match an intervention to a student.
So without a decision-making system such as that, these decisions, as I'm sure you're living and breathing, can be really, really challenging. Like, right? Like, how can we explain to ourselves and to others why some students are receiving supports and others are not? Right? Like, we have to be able to have a process in place or a system in place to say, this is the support we've decided to provide these students based on this data and this information. Here's how we're going to support them. But if we can't explain that, these do get kind of like tricky situations, because now it comes down to personal opinions and feelings, and then it can be of a monster of a story that really isn't aligned to what you're thinking and doing. It's just, you're just trying to help students the best way that you can. So another way to do that, or another way to think through this, of like, how do we make sure that we are formalizing systems and how students receive support, is figuring out the risk factor, like identifying the risk factor. And so what I mean by that with the risk factor is, there are many adults in our buildings, and I would imagine not all adults in your building assess and categorize risk the same. So, for example, when I was a practicing school counselor, I would have some teachers send students down to me because they may have forgot their pencils and books, and so they're unprepared. Go talk to the school counselor, right? Like, right now, you have to go talk right now. For my high school folks in there, this might resonate with you. Like, I need a schedule change today. This has to get done today. And that is high risk because my mom said it has to get done and I need to talk to you today, right? And then there are high risk where there's, threat to self or others, where there's risk there. But when we have adults in our building that don't have the same barometer of risk, that can be a challenge. So let's just ask the question here is, what is an example of something that you've seen in your building that the adult has referred a student to you for help and support that they deemed as high risk, but really wasn't that high risk at all? Like, what would that look like? There you go. Meg put the question in the chat. So what's an example of a low risk need that someone has referred to you as a high risk according to them?
I like your example of a pencil, Terry. That is definitely right. We've all been there, done that. Or even like a crying student, right? A kid just instantly drops into tears and they need to leave our classroom.
Yes. Like James said,
Oh,
crying.
James
You're
said
begging
crying.
it too. James, I know you and I used to work together back and forth, Smith, all the time. Any adult can hug and address a crying student. It does not have to be a crisis in this moment. And for my middle, oh, look at that. Student put chapstick on a chair. See, keep adding this because these are just funny, right?
This is funny.
And I go back to my middle school folks, and maybe this is other grades as well, but a student has to see you right now because my boyfriend just broke up with me, or my friends don't want to be my friends anymore. And then you wait 30 minutes and they have a new boyfriend and new friends, right? And everything's fine. But at that moment, it's a crisis. So it sounds like,
Heidi. Yeah.
yeah, so you know where I'm going with this, right? So when we live in worlds of reactivity, most of the time we're living in those because these are the crises or the high risk that are happening when really they're not really that high of risk. And so really thinking through what kind of systems can we put in place to address these so there's common language and understanding for all adults and students and families across the building so we can all categorize or define risk the same. So if I say, okay, a low risk thing, and maybe provide some examples, I just gave some examples here. A schedule change is not a high risk, right? Maybe there's some enrichment opportunities that are coming up that you want to tap some students into because you think they'll be a great fit. Or maybe it's just a question about just more information that could actually probably be found on the website, or someone else can answer those questions. Those are low risk. Are we still going to support the student? Yes, but maybe in a couple of days. Like, you're not going to see me immediately because I want to be in a classroom delivering a lesson, or I might be working with a small group, or I might be working with some students in some culture and climate building. So maybe in a couple of days, we'll circle back and answer those questions. So you kind of know, like, we're going to talk, but not right this minute. It's not a high risk. A medium risk might be within a day. Right? That maybe, okay, so maybe you're feeling some stress for whatever reason. Maybe you have a lot of homework and a lot of things going on at home that's getting in the way, interfering with you doing that work. Maybe there are social or friendship concerns or family concerns, or there's a grief, maybe because you've lost a loved one. Like, those are real valid things that we definitely need help and support and maybe need someone to talk through. But does it have to happen right this minute? Maybe not. So if I'm a school counselor and I'm running to a classroom to teach a lesson, and one of these needs come up, we're going to talk for sure. Hopefully within today, or at least within one day. But I'm not going to not deliver my lesson. I'm not going to stop everything that I'm doing right now to address this immediate need because it's about a medium risk. And then a high risk would be those that maybe the student is at risk of hurting self or others. Like, okay, we need to drop some things and make sure that we're paying attention to that, right? Making sure that they're safe, making sure others around them are safe. But when we are able to define these things as professionals and there's common language in our building and understanding, now people kind of know where the barometer is of this current situation and need, right? And we can assess it and we know how it's going to be addressed. Because the last thing we want our families or our communities or our students to think is that we're not addressing needs. That we don't want families to say, hey, my student wanted to talk to you and you said you're not going to talk to them at the moment because you were doing something else, right? Because that's how families will receive some of that information. And so thinking through the lens of like, how can I define these, and then how can we share these out with folks so they know like we are going to support your students, but here's kind of where we are with our scale of response time, right? So just laying it out. A more systems level approach to this could be that's more of a daily processes and procedures on a daily basis type approach. A more systems level approach is thinking about what are the criteria that we're looking at to identify students for highest need to medium need to lowest need. And again, writing these down, formalizing it, having a process that other people understand and abide by so there's consistency in how we do it, right? So if we say, look, highest level of need for us is that they're flagged in 3 or more highest risk areas. So we already know, as Megan was talking about her capacity chart, we're ruling them in for tier 2 support, right? We're not going to trust that they're going to get what they need in a tier 1 setting. We're going to give something more intentional and specific for these particular students. And here's the support they're receiving. If they're somewhere in the medium realm, but they're not at that high risk yet, we can decide, is this a tier 2 need, or is it something that if we give some more enhanced tier 1 support, that would be the right avenue to go? And those are decisions we get to make as adults. The best advice with those decisions is making sure that it's consistent, it's well thought out, and it's intentional. That we're not just doing things because we're like, I don't know, let's just try this, but we're actually thoughtful and having conversations. Whenever we can do this in a team-based approach, that's ideal. So it's not just one individual making these decisions, but as a team, we're deciding and what is the best way to support these students. And is it going to be more of a tier 1 support versus a tier 2 support versus a tier 3 support? So systemizing processes, procedures, and really mapping out what is our process, when are we going to see students, how are we supporting them, and then communicating that to your educational community.
All right, so now we've created this process for looking at data to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the students that need it the most at that tier 2 level. Then we need to think about what's actually going on, right? The root cause, and this is a great picture. Like we got to think about what are all the reasons why this fire might have been started in the first place. So when we think about it, we have to just let you know, like this is part of a system. If you've never thought about tier 2 and tier 3 as a strategic system, this is your opportunity to think about that. We work with school systems all the time about how to create a flow from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3, because most times we have tier 1 and we have tier 3 and we have no idea what to do at tier 2. So where we're at kind of in this flow is we've already created some decision rules. We've detected what's happening. Now we have to dig in. We're not going to automatically just give a student an intervention because we have no idea what's actually going down at the root, right? What's happening deeper below the surface than what's presenting itself at the top. And then if we think about the other 3 parts, it's designing the intervention plan, it's documenting what we're collecting data around, and then we're meeting together as a team to decide what to do. But we're really focusing here on digging in. What's the problem that's creating what we're seeing on the outside, right? And so we think about that often. Behavior is a form of communication. So what is it that is happening down below? So we want to think in 2 ways here. We want to think about the what is going on, and we want to think about the why that thing is going on. So the what, as we go back to the beginning, it's the problem, right? There's that discrepancy between what the student is doing and what we're thinking the student should be able to do. It's the main thing that's getting in the way. And when we want to look at the problem, we want to look at it in 3 different ways because that can dial it in even more. First, what's the duration? Is the problem a problem because it's like happening for a really long amount of time? I had a student at one point in time that would take himself and hide underneath a cabinet and start meowing. Okay, well, I mean, maybe if we did that and it didn't happen for a long time, that would be okay. But the kid was in there for multiple hours and didn't want to come out. Like it was the duration of the problem that made it such a big deal. We think about frequency. How often is that happening? Right? As a practicing school counselor, we might start to see that child is showing up many times during the day. Or as a social worker, it's that family that's always coming to me for support. Like, what's the frequency of the thing that's happening? Or it could be the intensity. It's actually not happening for very long or very often, but when the behavior happens, it's so severe that literally we need to remove students from a classroom or for a space so that we can help regulate and relate with that reason and reason with that child, right? So how severe is that problem? So is that the part of the problem that's getting in the way is the intensity. So once we find the what, then we need to look at the why. So the why is really into this paradigm of why is that behavior actually getting in the way? Does the student know what to do? Or do they need to be taught what to do? So we can think about that as gaps, like an acquisition need or gap. And that's where we have to actually teach the skill. So we need to think about aligning an intervention where the student can come and learn more strategies about the deficit that they have. Okay. Or we need to think about the performance piece. It's actually a mismatch with the environment. The student knows what to do, they just can't properly and appropriately do that thing in the environment that they're in. So we need to put in some prompts, cues, reminders, motivators, things that will help that student actually do and perform the behavior that they already know how to do. So there's this gap between I know what to do versus actually doing what to do. In my life, this is called eating the protein and the vegetables. I know I should, but there's a gap. There's a performance gap. Do I know? Have I been taught what I should eat and not eat? Absolutely. But there's a performance thing. If the cookies are sitting out, this gal is eating the cookies. Okay? Like that's it. So we can think about that in relation to our students and their behavior. So the what and the why. So you might want to engage in a simple root cause analysis. It doesn't have to be huge, but what's happening that the child is really, really good at? And then what is the main behavior that's getting in the way? We look at the dimension of that behavior. So we're dropping that resource for you. So you can take this and start to think about how could you possibly use a simple root cause analysis with your teaming. When we think about attendance, that's kind of its own issue. We want to think about attendance works. Drop in the chat a thumbs up if you've ever gone to the attendance works website, but great resource for you. They actually have a root cause for attendance worksheet, which would be something that we would highly encourage you to do because we know attendance is a major issue right now. And we want to think about, for those that we do have control over at this moment, how can we do a root cause analysis for that? Daryl has used attendance works in the past. Awesome.
So please know, root cause analysis is probably one of the most valuable things you can do in regards to applying appropriate intervention, and is oftentimes the most missed thing. Like people will see a need, they'll look at their data, identify a need, and they'll jump straight to intervention. And then they'll be like, well, why didn't that work? Why I ran a group, or I was doing check in, check out, or I was actually, individual attention and behavior plans. Why didn't it work? And the question might be, did it not work because it's not a good intervention, or did it not work because it didn't align to the root cause? So taking the time to really go through and think about what is the root of the challenge, the barrier that the student's feeling, and then how can I apply appropriate intervention? So when you're doing this, thinking about what interventions do I go to? So I can do some root cause analysis and identify challenges and barriers, but then what? Then what do I go to, right? I was actually in Iowa. I think there's some Iowa folks on one time, or on this call. I was in Iowa a few years ago, and I literally was doing a session at their conference around tier 2 interventions. Like, it was like the magic tier 2 intervention. It was called something like that. And when I tell you that there were hundreds, like over 200 people in this small room, like everybody was like, what's the magic intervention, Terry? You're going to tell us something that's this magical intervention that we don't know anything about yet. And I was probably disappointing about 200 people when I said, you're going to have to do the work. In order to find the magic intervention, you're going to have to figure out some root cause analysis, right? So what are these magic interventions? And then how do we display them in a way so that we can employ them easily, that we're not creating things on the run, but that we're being intentional? So thinking about a menu of interventions. What would be on your menu of interventions, right? So being thoughtful about this, because the menu is important. When I go to a restaurant, I'm looking at that menu because that is the most important thing in regards to my decision making, right? So you tell me in the chat, when you go to a restaurant, you're super excited to eat there, and the menu's too small, how does that feel? How's that a challenge? The menu's too small.
Well, Terry, if the
There you
menu
go.
is
Yep.
only prime rib, I don't want it. So
Okay.
it's
Well, I
not going
might
to meet
not
my
want it,
needs.
right? Ask my spouse to read it. Okay. If it, well, not small print. I mean, small in quantity. How about that one? Yes. Thank you, Jason. Maybe I want some more variety. Maybe, yes, James, you and I are much alike. I want to eat everything, right? So when I have limited options, that's a challenge for me. You might not have something on your menu that's actually going to address my needs. Or the flip side of that, my son and I were just traveling and we went to BJ's. And if you've ever been to a BJ's restaurant, they have a large menu. There's so many things on that menu. And on the flip side of that, when there's too much on the menu, it's a random go. It's a grab and grab. And can you do anything that well when there's that many things on the menu, right? So it's like, what's the healthy balance of the right type of interventions, the amount of interventions, and what we're going to provide that feels like the right fit for our students and for us as a school site, right? So that's important just to think through as you're trying to figure out what strategies and interventions are we going to employ. So Megan had mentioned earlier in regards to that root cause analysis and really starting to tease out, is this a performance need? Is it an acquisition need? Maybe it's an attendance or an academic need. So as you think through that root cause and you start to identify those barriers, we can say, okay, if it is attendance or it is academics, here's our menu of interventions that have worked for us, that have worked for our students, that we can employ, and then we can utilize these things immediately. We don't have to wait to build it. We don't have to like, oh, I wish we had this, but we don't have it right now, right? We have a menu that we can go to of services. So when you're creating your menus, just think again, what is that root cause? The need it meets. And this, just so you know as well, on that resource drop that we gave you, that these examples are there as well. So you'll be able to go back to these because people are always like, well, I need some new examples of tier 2 interventions. They're all in those resources that we're dropping. So when you look at that root cause, what are those needs? And then thinking about what are the interventions that people are familiar with that address that root cause? What are some things that you're comfortable with? You know that's worked. That's something that you can employ pretty easily and pretty quickly, right? It's a strategy. It's not I'm just going to grab something off of the internet and try this. No, it's thoughtful and it's intentional and it's proactive. So we maybe just fire hosed you. Like Meg and I were so excited about all the things we wanted to share with you. We were like, we have to do this in an hour. So the reality is in a webinar, you might feel like you just got sprayed with a fire hose. Like, oh my gosh, there's so many different things and nuggets that were just thrown at me. I don't even know where to start, right? First and foremost, you can't do everything well right away, right? You have to pick and choose. So considering you can't do everything all at once, just think, what is one action step you will take after today? Right? And maybe that, and I would love to hear it in the chat. So if you want to drop it in, just one action step. What are you going to commit to? I always like to say, put it out there in the universe, because once it's out there in the universe, it's going to happen. You're like, oh, I said it. I told those people on the webinar that this is what I was going to do. So now I have to make it happen. Right? So what's one action step? And when you think about your action steps, it can be, hey, I'm going to go back to that resource and I'm really going to do a root cause analysis with some tier 2 supports that I'm putting in place coming up for the next semester. Or it might be, I need to take this webinar and share it with my team because we need to talk through how we want to approach this from a team-based approach, right? So just drop in the chat. What's one thing that you want to commit to? Just for a review of what we talked about. We talked about tier 1. So talked about that foundation of tier 1 and what those proactive behavior practices might look like. And Megan gave some examples of those. We had talked about the skill building, right? And really thinking through how can we be more intentional about social and life skills and teaching those skills in settings where students have learning brains, that we're not just reacting to those needs in the moment, but we're meeting them more proactively. We talked about assessing capacity and creating system-wide decision rules, like how do we know what our capacity is and how are we addressing those needs with our students in various ways, whether it be tier 1 or tier 2. We talked about the risk factor, just naming it, identifying it, coming up with some common language. That root cause analysis, of course, that Megan walked through that document, that resource, and then that menu of interventions. So I see the chat blowing up right now. Megan, what are some things that are going through the chat of some takeaways that people are getting from this?
Yeah, it's all over the place, which is awesome. So sharing it with teams, building a menu of intervention has come up a couple of times. Doing a simple root cause analysis. Yeah, all of it.
Nice. Love it.
Decision rules. So I think everybody grabbed a little of what they needed, is what that says to me.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, yeah, the
And
best.
hopefully, oh,
Go ahead. No.
hopefully some of you that are saying other things are like, oh, I do that. So hopefully this was reaffirming that some of these tools are things that you're already doing, and you grab something that you could spend a little bit more time on as well. Yeah, awesome. So what is your current, yeah, remember you said that. A lot of you were at a two, some were at a like 1.5. That was awesome. Love it. So think about that and then think about what's my next step from here. So I'm going to share whatever it is I did put in the chat. That's where I want to go. And then think about how you might be able to get some more support. So if you seriously live in a cycle of reactivity, which for some of us, that is the case right now, and we empathize with that and we're here for you. Like as Terry said at the beginning, we are here to serve you. That's our goal. We're both former school counselors. Like, can you say we help? Maybe too much, right? But like, how can we help you? Like, just reach out, send us a quick email, check out, contact us through the website. But we can help support your district or your school if you need help with intentional systems, because systems work is challenging. And oftentimes you need somebody outside of your system to help support you in like looking at your internal systems because you're just too enmeshed in it. Um, Two, if you can collaborate with your site teams, right? Like, how do you take this? A lot of you said that. A lot of you said you were two, and you said, take this back to my team. So apply one of these strategies to be more proactive. If you were just here to learn, take one of those things and commit to it yet this school year because we do have a lot of school year left. So hopefully you can take one of those things and fit yourself into one of those little buckets or silos. But we are here to support you. We also want to make sure that you know that we've got two things going on. We actually just started a tier two group coaching experience yesterday. If you still want to do that, we decided this morning actually, like we can offer it to you all and do it with you as a group too. So if you're interested at all, we're going to drop that in the chat is how you can sign up for that. We're going to start another group on the 17th of February if you'd like to join it. Again, it's just group coaching around how to do tier two well. Or if you're interested in March, we are going March 11th, where you're going to have another webinar on how to get tier two right. So what's more of the blueprint, going more through that 5-step problem solving process and getting tier two right. So if that's of interest to you, feel free to register and join us again.